Going live in just a second. We are live. Good evening and welcome to another Thursday night parent-teacher chat. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'm a candidate for the Montgomery County Board of Education in the November election. I'm a parent of 3 MCPS kids, 1 each in elementary, middle, and high school. There's a lot, that used to be a lot of driving, now it's a lot of bandwidth. I am also a college professor in the county, the incredible thing about that is that 90% of my students come from MCPS. I've taught online. So for all those, I've taught online for a bunch of years. So for all those folks thinking about online teaching and having trouble with it, parents, teachers, you can always reach out to me. I've been doing this for a bunch of years. Lastly, I've been a PTA leader, including a PTA president, where I know about, among other things, about box stops, which we were just talking about. And I hope to continue that work on the board. So with that, today we are meeting with parents and teachers and a therapist who all of whom have worked in and around special ed. And so we're going to talk about how things are going, what problems there are, how we can do better. So I want to throw this first to AJ. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go around the Zoom room.
I'm a special education mom. I have a daughter who had a 504 plan, and now she has an IEP plan. She's in high school at Blair. And I help parents navigate the system. It's very difficult, and I give advice where I can and help where I can.
Thank you, AJ. Let's see, let's get a teacher in there. Lisa.
My name is Lisa Moran. I am a special education teacher at Montgomery Blair High School. I am also a parent of a graduate of Montgomery Blair and a current 12th grader at Montgomery Blair. At Blair, we have one special education program, the LAD, which is Learning and Academic Disabilities Program. And so our teachers in the special education department there primarily co-teach. So that's what I do. I co-teach English 11. So I'm paired with general education teachers. And then I also case manage students who have IEPs.
Thank you, Lisa. Charlotte.
I'm Charlotte Shoneman. I am mother to a junior at Blair who has a 504 plan for ADHD with executive function.
Thank you. Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Splain. I am a special educator. I've been with the county for 7 years. Over the 7 years, I've been in 4 programs in 4 different elementary schools, ranging from working with students who were 3 years old up until 5th grade. Right now, I am a behavior support teacher with the Social Emotional Special Education Services Program, or SESES. And so while I'm not in the classroom full time anymore, I do support a caseload of up to 30 students who all have a range of pretty significant behavioral, attention, and social emotional needs.
Christina, if I can ask you, is that caseload gone up or down during the pandemic?
It's fluctuated. Right now, the school that I'm at has the highest caseload of our elementary school programs. We got 4 new students over the course of the spring who started with us this fall.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And Robin.
Yes. Hi, I'm Robin Brannon. I'm a child and family therapist at Better Together Family Therapy in Kensington. And the special education teams at all of the MCPS schools are so busy helping their students and guiding them through everything that they need to, that they don't have the opportunity or they don't have the time to support the parents in implementing those IEP goals at home during homework time, or understanding what their child's needs might be in the family context. And so that is where we come in. We help those families that have kids with special education needs or with 504 plans as well, to be able to function a little bit better in the family context and be better understood in that context. I am also an MCPS parent. I have an 8th grader with an IEP, and I have a 4th grader as well.
Robin,
Well,
can I just say that what you just mentioned has been a focus of our program as a whole
That is awesome.
during distance learning this time around. I held parent meetings in continuation of learning in the spring that were fairly well attended, which I was surprised at because it's very difficult to get special education parents into a building. And so we've actually worked really hard to take advantage of this opportunity to meet parents in a different way. And it has become a program kind of request from our supervisors to have 3 parent meetings over the next 2 quarters, in each of the next 2 quarters, to support them with things that they need, and plan topics, but then also plan for time for them to collaborate with one another, because we understand that our students' parents may not have the same difficulties that their neighborhood parents are having. And so to provide them the cohort that they wouldn't otherwise have has been a focus of what we're trying to do in distance learning, because we have the opportunity to meet them where they're at in a way that we couldn't before.
That's awesome.
You're facilitating a support group. All right, great. Thank you. So as usual, Blair is overrepresented here. And so let me start with the teachers and say, so this is obviously a very difficult time for everybody, families and students and teachers. So from your point of view, how are things going? What is working, what is not? Lisa, you want to take that first?
Okay. What is going well?
Yeah.
Is that it isn't going as badly as we had anticipated.
Okay.
So I am aware that we are choosing the lesser of 2 evils in a way. I don't think any of us, teachers, parents, students, want to be out of the buildings. We want to be in the buildings. I can't tell you how heartbreaking it is every day not to be with my kids, and to have to be with my own kids. Let's just say that. I much prefer to be in the building with other people's kids than at home with my teenage and 20-year-old sons. So, but it isn't going as roughly as we thought. I feel that the students are engaging more than I expected. Now, I am only speaking for high school, so I'm not certain what the experiences are at the elementary and middle level, but it is very difficult to engage high school students even when you're in person, as any of us who are parents as well of teenagers know. And we have quite a few of them showing up. I would say our attendance has been much better than I had expected. Are they actually participating while they're with us? It's difficult to say sometimes, but even excusing that, I would say that there are a lot of students who are participating and engaging. I think that teachers have worked extremely hard to try and make the instruction more rigorous than it was in the spring when we had to close at a moment's notice.
Sure.
And so I think, they're trying to provide more enriching instruction. I would say the challenges have been the technology on many levels. So one is the technology in the sense that many of us had to learn a lot of new platforms all at once.
Right.
So the county had a plan
And
last
on our
year.
own.
Pardon?
And on our own. I don't know about you, but I know I've kind of been doing that on my own.
Yes, well, yeah, and that's another issue. But certainly, you know, the county had intended, for example, to roll out a new online grading system. And before COVID hit, that was the one big thing that we were all going to learn and adapt to. And we were very excited about the communication between that system and other platforms that we use to collect data. And to add that on top of having to learn new systems for presenting material, learning Zoom, learning other ways to make the lessons more engaging. So it isn't just putting up lessons, but you're also trying to use other tools that are engaging. Things like, I'm just throwing out jargon here, sorry, but for the parents who are aware, it's, you know, Nearpod and Pear Deck and Edpuzzle, and I can go on. Trying to adapt all of our learning to the online platform to make it engaging enough. I think really the mountain of learning for teachers has been a steep one to climb. And then it's been steep for the parents and the students as well. So I think the county is making an effort to coordinate things a little better. And so we're all on my MCPS Classroom, where before we were using Google Classroom as well. So I think they're trying to coordinate things so that parents and students find it easier to navigate. But even that, MCPS Classroom is a Canvas product, and it has a lot of bells and whistles, which can make it a lot of fun when it works and can make it very difficult when you don't know what to do with it for parents and students and teachers. So there's that learning curve for everyone. And then on top of that, you know, it's not a perfect system when we have millions of people across the country using the same platforms at the same time. And so we've had instances where no one can access Zoom, no one can access Google Drive, no one can access Classroom. And that brings things to a bit of a halt. I think teachers and students and parents have been extremely flexible about working with that when that has happened. And then finally, particularly in special education and particularly in a school like Blair and the communities that we serve, I am continually dealing with a lack of access to technology. So this may not be as much of an issue in certain pockets of our county, but where we are in the Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, and larger Silver Spring area, I serve a lot of students and families who do not have ready access. And it might be the computer, it might be a Wi-Fi connection, it might be sharing in the house. Everybody's sharing the same internet, everyone's sharing similar computers. It might be noise, it might be time, it might be other challenges that they have from their families. So we are also dealing with those pieces. And then I haven't even touched on the social emotional, but I think there are other people who are better qualified here to talk about that. But so it's a mixed bag, but I would prefer to be doing what we're doing than try to be part-time or full-time in the building. That would be my feeling about it.
So can I just ask you specifically, so you said that you teach on level in English 11, right?
Correct. I co-teach English 11. That's right.
So do you see any difference in this context, right, between the special education students and the non-special education students? They're in the same class, so environmentally they're receiving the same instruction, but is there a difference between them, or do you think that is not, or is not visible, or, you know, what do you think?
Do you mean a difference in terms of the access to technology?
All, you know, access to
any of the things I mentioned?
Engagement, learning, however you want to take that.
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
It's the same as when we're live. So in theory, our on-level classes are inclusion, which is supposed to mean that our special education students are being blended in with students of various backgrounds and levels and educational abilities. At Blair, we don't do that. It's more tracked. And so our inclusion classes really comprise more students of a similar academic ability. And so do the other classes at Blair. And so my classes are comprised not just of special education students, but a lot of 504 students, a lot of former ESOL students, a lot of what we call alternative one students, which are students who are in danger of dropping out or failing and who were put into an alternative program before they were sent to an alternative two program, which is a separate building. So I would not call my class heterogeneous in terms of ability, socioeconomic background. I would say the majority of my students are Black and brown students. I could probably count on two hands in an entire school year how many white students I teach. Okay. On two hands across 2 semesters, I can count on two hands the number of students that I teach who are white. Sure. My classroom population is not the same as probably at least 50%, more like 60, 70% of the other classes at Blair. So we have, we have Magnet and we have a CAT program. We have a lot of students in AP classes, a lot of students in honors classes. So I am not co-teaching those classes. My classes are definitely, the demographic makeup is very different. The socioeconomic background is very different. And yes, I would say the engagement is much lower for a lot of different reasons.
Okay, so I want to come back to you. But
that's a great question though, because one of the things that this has allowed our program to do is provide our students with some more opportunities in a mainstream environment, because a lot of what restricts my students from accessing mainstream, and I'm in elementary school, there's a lot of emotional dysregulation in little bodies, right? Online or not. But one of the things that, we've got some students who are really thriving and are accessing mainstream settings more because the behavior component that restricted their access before has been removed. They're home, they're in a safe space. They may not have the same materials or economic status as their peers, given where my school is. But the behavioral component has really been eliminated, and they're able to participate in really different and wonderful ways. Some of my students are really thriving in this environment. And then I have those students who desperately need somebody sitting next to them the entire time, and the parents don't have the bandwidth to do it. And so the workload that we are asking the parents to do is a workload that I would normally do. And I feel for those parents and I understand it, but it is kind of one of the fallbacks of something like this.
What do you think distinguishes the kids that are thriving from the kids that need more directives? What is there some kind of factor, or is it completely idiosyncratic?
It's kind of idiosyncratic based on my caseload right now. My program is primarily boys. I have 24 boys and 2 girls in my program. That's it. And it really just kind of depends on their skills and their strengths, and where their comfort level is and what we're working on. I've got students with major anxiety who really needed a lot of support just turning on the camera. And then I have students who also have some cognitive stuff who don't understand that because I'm on screen here, the people in the TV can't see me, right? Like, because you're trying to explain to a first grader what this is, and that the TV's okay, they can't see you, it's fine, like, and they don't want to come on screen anymore, so it kind of depends on what they're dealing with, and what their academic levels are, because some of my students are higher than their peers, but their behaviors really restrict their access to a mainstream environment. They get really dysregulated. They have lots of issues with getting overwhelmed with a lot of people around them. But they're very technology focused. So I was doing a social skills group and one of my links didn't work. And one of my third graders was like, "Oh, Miss Blaine, you must have unlinked it. Here's how you fix that," and walked me through it. I knew, but like, it was really cute. And one of those just like, you're one of the ones that really likes this. This plays to his strengths and takes away any of the weaknesses that the program needs him to work on, which are those social skills, those interactions, that flexibility of moving in between settings, or dealing with different input or different responses, right? Because if he doesn't want to listen to one of his peers, he can just take his headphones off, right? He can't do that in setting, right? We can't do that in building. And so it's interesting, you know, some of my students are really thriving, some of my students are really, really struggling. And we got to find ways to support them in different ways and to support their parents, because that's really who's taking on the majority of that workload, particularly when you talk about younger students with a lot of social emotional dysregulation.
Thank you. Actually, I'm glad you pointed out that some kids are actually doing better, because we don't hear that often enough. Charlotte, how is your daughter doing? How is virtual learning going for her? What are her challenges? What's working? You need to unmute. Let me see if I can do that for you. Oh, sorry.
It's completely upside down from what Christina is talking about with younger people. This is Zoe obviously is in high school, and her problem is with executive function. So she was limping along up till now. She has some medicine she takes that kind of focuses her a little more and keeps her from getting too distracted. But going through this distance learning pointed up just this whole range of things that are massively challenging for her, which is basically to create her own structure. You know, they're basically, in terms of executive function, they're right now working at a college level. And I'd say Zoe is about a 5th grade level for executive function. For English and math, she's at an 11th or 12th grade level. Like, she's taking calculus right now. But for executive function, she's like at a 5th grade level. But you can't do distance learning at a 5th grade level. They're just like, here, do it all on your own timeline. That's like kryptonite for her. Like, she can't make a schedule, you know, or I should say it's very, very challenging for her to make a schedule. It's very, very challenging for her to move from one task to another. It's very, very challenging for her to prioritize her tasks. It's very, very challenging for her to create a calendar from scratch, but not spend 20 hours doing that. You know, she'll take on one task, like, oh, I see that this needs to be done, and then she'll just spend 10 hours doing it. We didn't realize how much school provided a structure for children who learn like Zoe learns. You know, everybody is there, surrounded by everybody doing the same thing for a certain amount of time. And then at a certain moment, there's a bell, and you go with everybody else, and you go get it, receive instruction, and then you do the same thing as everybody else for another hour, and then you go. So structured, so beneficial for children like Zoe. And now she's none of that.
And for teachers, I gotta say, teachers with executive functioning issues are really drowning right now too, right? Like, I feel for your daughter. I don't think I could have done this in high school, and I had a 504 for executive function as well. And you know, the first week or two was, I'm with her. I feel it.
Do you help her, Charlotte? What do you?
It takes so much effort on my part to support her. Just like teeth brushing and getting dressed and stuff like that, it's huge. But also, I end up spending like 2 hours a day coaching her and counseling her. And it's also, at this age, it's very hard on our relationship because she wants independence and agency. It's very different. Like, younger children, they need help, but they also want help. So this is a conundrum of a person who on some levels needs help and on many levels doesn't want help. And even if they want help, it's hard to know, like, this isn't exactly my bailiwick. I do property management. I I think I'm pretty dialed into Zoe, that sometimes I'll remind her 3 times and it won't be enough. Sometimes I'll remind her 5 times and she'll be like, Mom, back off, I already did it. And I'm like, how can I know? How can I know?
I have the same problem with my son, by the way. He's neurotypical. He doesn't have IEP, none of that. But I do exactly the same. So it's not. I mean, in some ways, it's I think it's the age rather than.
Right, but if she didn't need a whole lot of support, then I would just be like, good, deal with it, whatever, brush your teeth, don't brush your teeth. But, then she's like, oh, I'm in a like downward spiral of like shame and failure and I don't know what to do.
Right. Those students who are really internally motivated are the ones who are doing well right now. And the ones who really thrive on the external motivation and the external feedback and the external structures and support are the ones that are drowning.
Yeah.
Yes. Charlotte, I
Across
think you're
the board.
talking about every family we see in our practice, right? That is exactly the experience that we're hearing over and over and over again. I didn't know how much my child would struggle. I'm seeing what the issues are now. And in some ways, that's a really nice gift because we're seeing what the gaps will be when we hit college.
Yes.
And we can create a really nice organized plan to fill those gaps between now and then. Yeah. And for some of those kids, we're seeing them at the elementary level or we're seeing them at the middle school level. So we have lots of time to work on those sorts of things. But then, Christina, the families that you were talking about of the kids that are restricted from being in the mainstream environment because they get so overwhelmed for sensory reasons, or maybe their social skills aren't quite what they need to be. Those are the
emotional
families
regulation.
that are getting,
yeah.
Those are the families that are getting the phone calls during the school year about what happened at recess or what happened at lunch. Somebody pushed somebody, somebody hit somebody.
Or if they're not in our program yet, they're getting phone calls to come pick up their child. I try and talk our parents through that when they come into our program of we don't do that. We know why you're here and there's no judgment and we're here because we want to work with these kids. But yeah, you're right. They're getting they get a lot more contact throughout the year.
Yeah, definitely. And right now what's happening with those families, as they're seeing their kids' executive function challenges, they're seeing the areas in which structure helped. Those families are then trying to sign their kids up for things like the pod classrooms that Kids After Hours is doing, or other childcare type arrangements. And so suddenly we've got folks who are not trained in special education, who are not really equipped, and those kids are getting kicked out of childcare programs and left at home with mom and dad who are also working full time and not really able to support. So it really is a major challenge for those
childcare. Some of the childcare programs, I mean, there are some really good ones in the county who are really supportive, yes. But a lot of my kids have been, prior to pandemic, removed from those programs, which is really sad for me to say. There are not a lot of programs that support students who have emotional behavioral needs in the county outside of what the county provides. Private schools don't take them on. A lot of private placement schools will look at, what are their behaviors? And it's you're a private placement school. I don't understand. And so there's a really big gap in services for students across the board, pre-K and younger to high school, with emotional and behavioral needs.
Right. And now those settings are their learning environment.
Right.
Now we're asking them to do their learning in that type of context. It's a real challenge for a lot of families.
It really is. It really is.
AJ, how's things going for you?
Oh, I'm fine.
I'm talking about Marika, actually. Sorry.
Oh. Yeah. So, we took advantage of the third-party vendor AP programs. So for those of you who don't know, you can pay a small fee and you can be enrolled in an asynchronous class online to do a single semester. I thought this was going to be a brilliant solution. I was stoked. This was wonderful. This is a problem I can solve. She ditched the first 2 weeks completely. Didn't bother to check in, didn't do anything. It was terrifying. It's in her 11th grade year. She's done incredibly well up to now. She's made wonderful progress. and she ditches. She goes to her MCPS classes, but not the asynchronous ones. Pulled her out by the skin of the deadline and put her back into MCPS full-time, all classes. She could not handle the idea that you can move things around in your schedule and do things later. So everything we learn after freshman year in college, you know, when you're studying up all night because you haven't done the reading for the entire semester and you've got a stack of books and you got to get through them before your test at 9 a.m. So it's been a massive challenge. She spends hours and hours and hours doing homework and relearning and reteaching. And it's just, this online school is just not working for us just at all, on any level, in any way. And that's nothing to do with the teachers. As previously said, technology has been challenging, to say the very least. You know, finding basic things like, hey, where's the video from the class? It's never in the same place. And like, I just asked her today, it's like, I wanted her to show me an example of the math problems she was working on. She's like, well, we really don't have worksheets anymore. And I'm like, well, how do you practice the problem? And she's like, the teacher does it, and I look and I watch. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, how do you, she talks about it, and then you have to do the how do you do these basic things are just not present. And again, that has nothing to do with the teachers or the special ed teachers, or, you know, massive shout out to Terrell Reed and Chris Gulick, who do an amazing job. Yeah, but there are some massive challenges that are just not going to go away.
So can I ask, is Marika in the in a class that is similar to what Lisa is teaching, which is like,
No,
or she's in the mainstream?
fully mainstreamed.
Fully mainstream. And
Yeah.
does she have co-teachers? Does she have any coaches? Or we have a question actually from Rachel Tate asking if there are any social emotional club that students can join at the high school, whether virtual or something like that. Is there?
That I know of.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Clubs are beginning. In fact, we have an innovation period today. There was a presentation on clubs, and I do believe that there were some clubs today that were presented that are essentially social clubs. I'm not sure what the offerings are. It's a long list, but they can check. We are doing virtual clubs, and we're also doing virtual athletics.
That's right. Virtual athletics, everybody's talking about, but the virtual clubs, I'm just wondering if there are any specific ones that are good for kids that need social emotional help.
At the high school level, you would not label it that way because no one would go.
Yes.
No, I think you got to look for like mindfulness club, or
you need to find something with your interest, right? Your interest area.
Dungeons and Dragons Club.
There's lots of different ones. So I think the best way is for students to connect over something they're interested in. And so parents who would like for their students to make more connections with others should look at the list of clubs that at Blair just came out. I'm not sure what's happening in other high schools, but I would imagine other high schools are doing virtual clubs as well.
All right. So Charlotte and AJ, are your daughters have they been part of clubs in Blair before?
My daughter,
Is that helpful?
there's no way at all. She has too much academic work to do. She barely sees her friends as it is. And anything, I mean, she spends 2 or 3 times doing the amount of time doing homework that a similarly situated child will, who doesn't have special education.
And mine's the same. That's the toughest thing. That's the way in which Zoe was limping through pre-COVID, was just by spending 3 times as much time on everything that everyone else did, and having a lot of support from me as well.
By definition, it's the supports that are being given and that are connecting and that are working aren't mitigating what happens when she comes home. So if it's working well in school and she's doing grades, right, doing fine on the grades, when she comes home, if it takes her 3 hours to recreate 45 minutes worth of homework, then it's that bridge that never gets created, I guess. Yeah.
These kids need more downtime and more work time.
So, Robin, how are you? When in these situations, what do you suggest? How, you said you work with families, so what is the thing that we ought to be doing?
Well, I think partnership with school is key, right? Making sure that you're in touch with your child's resource teacher, if they have special education staff support in that way, or if you've got a child with 504 plan, in touch with the counseling team or whoever is administering that plan for your child, making sure that that collaboration is happening so that accommodations can be adjusted when they need to be adjusted, so that these kids are not doing busy work. They're not doing, 10 of the same thing over and over again. If they've got it, and they can move on because they take time in those sorts of ways. So that collaboration is really important. But then also as parents, making sure that they have breaks, that these kids don't just come home and work for hours and hours and hours on homework, that they get that downtime because they need it. They need the mental downtime. They need a break, exercise a little bit, to keep the brain going. They need a balance, just like other kids need balance.
But is the cost of the balance academic performance? That's a question. I mean, that's a hard question.
I think that's a question mostly for the school side, but I would say, especially at the elementary and middle levels, if you've got that IEP really working appropriately for you, it shouldn't cost you in terms of academic performance to be able to have the structure and the scaffolding that you need in order to access the grade level curriculum, right? That's the purpose of an IEP.
And the other thing is
has what they need.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and that's kind of a great question, because we provide a lot of breaks in our programs, like in building, right? I've been in a lot of different programs in the county. I've worked with students with really significant physical and cognitive disabilities, and now I'm kind of on the other end where a lot of my students are on grade level, but they've got these other things that prohibit access or can prohibit access. And in all of those settings, no matter if we're 3 grade levels behind or on grade level, their brains aren't prepared to learn if they're overwhelmed, or if they're stressed out, or if their nervous system is shot, right? So and I think that goes for high school too. I know the stakes are higher in high school, and so it feels different as a parent and as a student. I mean, I had my own accommodations in high school and remember that process with my parents where I was yelling at them that no, I had to do it right now, that type of thing, or no, that can wait. But that amount of sustained effort does things to your body and the way that you think and the way that you feel and the way that you feel about yourself. And so if we're not taking care of those parts, they're not in a space to accept what we need to get them to learn. If my students are really dysregulated and overwhelmed, they're not taking in any of the information I'm giving them one-on-one or in mainstream or in our self-contained classroom. It's just not happening. They're not taking it in. It may look like they are, but they're not. So it's a balance, but there's a payoff if you take care of one part of it.
Okay, self-care. I mean, the students have to learn about self-care, and parents, I think, at some point, have to get them to that position. I want to ask about the switch from the IEP to the IDLP, right? Which is the
individualized distance learning plan. I'm doing those meetings right now.
Correct. And so there's been some controversy about, some people have gotten this and some people haven't. And then there's an issue about, what services, so can somebody take this and say, sort of explain what the process is? And then let's go that way. AJ put up her hand. So AJ,
well, I just got it today. So
you did?
Yeah.
Okay,
so
let's hear it.
Essentially, it was just a change in language. So I'm under no illusions that every bit of this IEP is being put out and done at every single, it's not happening. But there's enough of it happening that I'm okay with it.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Well, yes, a good special ed teacher takes the IEP, looks at it, and then looks at the child and figures out what to do. It's the total difference. But her distance IEP is essentially just a few word changes. Nothing major. I didn't have a meeting about it. It was just sent to me. Take a look at it, like it or not. You know, thumbs up, thumbs down.
But aren't you supposed to sign off on it?
No. I mean, I have to say yes, but I'm not
Right,
signing.
so we do have to wait for the parent to agree before we can implement anything.
But I'm not signing. I mean, it's not a drastic change, and yes,
Right.
there's laws and rules, but when you've been at it as long as we have, my daughter was 3 years old the first time MCPS evaluated her. You know, at this point, we've got a shorthand worked out. They're like, take a look. It's okay. It's not, you know.
Well, there's that, but there's also, Sunil, I don't know if you know this, but laws have changed recently in special education. You used to have to sign the IEP every year that you went through, and special education laws have made it so that you only have to sign the initial IEP. So when you talk about changes to the IEP in this way, it really is a verbal or email kind of, yeah, this looks good. This is what we talked about, or I agree to this, or you know, whatever. So there has been a change recently that not every single IEP has to be signed every year as it was in the past.
Okay.
And it's about a good relationship. If you have a good relationship with this special ed teacher, you're not going to have, you know, a hostile situation, you know, where you're like fighting, you know, but it comes over time. It doesn't always start out well, and sometimes you have to work on it.
Charlotte, your daughter has a 504, not even an IEP, right?
That's right.
Right. And is there any? Does that work? How is that?
Basically, I mean, it's been hard for me to navigate, and AJ has helped me a lot to some degree over the years. Like, I've checked in with her at various points. But especially this year, when Zoe was really struggling, I've been begging for more support from the guidance counselor and other people at school for the past 6 months. Actually, we also had kind of I don't know, sort of stressful thing happen like 9 months ago. So we were asking for help from the counselor from way back then. And then there was COVID, and I was asking, but I was at the same time kind of cutting them some slack because I figured, what can they do really? They're handling all this other stuff. But we got nothing. And so she struggled really all through the spring. And come the end of the school year, I really started laying into them. Because of COVID, there were a lot more kind of outreach to parents about like, well, call this number if you need help with anything. And so I'm like, wow, there are numbers you could call. And so I learned about all these extra layers and levels of support that were available. And I started calling. Nothing really substantive came of it. But by the time school started, I was much more engaged. And when the counselor insisted that there was no support class to help her with basic study skills, I went to the PTA email list and I asked the parents, isn't there anything, what have you found? What do you do since there's nothing at school? Like, why, how can I let her go to college not having these basic skills? And parents like AJ told me there is a class. It's called a resource class. You have to ask for it specifically. Once I asked specifically for the resource class, I got it. I had to know the special code word for it. And then everything since then has been just like that. I call AJ, I'm like, what about this? And she's like, it's called this. You just have to demand it. I'm like, really? I can demand that? She's like, yeah. So you need somebody to walk you through it. Like it's totally mysterious, and I think the way it works, the accommodations work. My impression at this point is that there are a lot of accommodations available, and the staff maybe don't have very much control over who gets them, and so they just make the method very opaque. Like they're very strong gatekeepers because actually there's no system of assessing like who gets what.
Lisa, what do you think? I mean, where from you're looking at it from the other side of the um, of all of this, right? Where do you think why? Where do you think is there a misperception? Is there what's not working, or what do you think is going on?
First of all, you're talking about two different systems. So Charlotte's daughter and AJ's daughter are operating under two laws.
Thank you. That's very important to know.
504 is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the special education system is part of the IDEA law. Resource class is for students in special education. There's a separate budget for that. And so when students who do not have an IEP are in those classes, it's you're sharing a resource that we aren't getting any money from the county to provide. It's offered to our students with IEPs. That's not to say that there shouldn't be or couldn't be something for students with a 504. The alternative is a study hall. We do have many study halls at Blair, even though it's not broadcast. Study hall is different because it is really just a place to do your homework. It doesn't count for a grade. It's not monitored or manned by anybody who's teaching anything. They're really just making sure students are there and doing work. Resource class, the students are taught study skills like you're talking about that you wanted, Charlotte, and that hopefully AJ, your daughter, is getting in resource. So the students there are supposed to be learning skills to help them with organization. But it is specifically under the special education department for students with IEPs. And I don't make the rules about that. If we want to change that, that's something that has to be done at the county/state/federal level. It's about the dollars.
And I think that's a great distinction too, is that like, depending on your special education staff or your counselor staff or whoever, like there can be a really big disparity in the resources available. And I think I find that, for the parents that I've worked with, and I've worked with parents with high schoolers who are going through 504 things and other things like that. My primary stuff is in elementary school, but the parents with 504s have to fight a lot harder sometimes and longer, and they have to know exactly which questions to ask, and there's jargon and keywords that you have to know to use to get access to services, and that's a really big issue in special education, just the kind of the way we deliver it as a country and as a county, at a smaller, more microscopic level. But it's true, there's kind of a disparity here under who's allowed to access what based on their coding or the resources or which schools they're in or all of those things.
So now I want to ask Robin and actually everybody else, right? Is what can we do as a matter of policy, right? To at least make this less jargony, less coded, less and more available. I'm not saying anything substantive, right? I'm just focused now on basic sort of communication and knowledge. Okay, okay, you go first, Charlotte.
So maybe this is too obvious, but maybe everyone's already thought of this, except when I asked for this, they're like, so Zoe, of course, had taken study hall for a long time because, like I said, she benefits from structure, and so it would be good for her to sit there for one more hour of the school day and work in a concerted way, and then come home and then work, in a different environment. So she did that. Unfortunately, other people in study hall were there for different reasons and maybe had been told they needed to take a study hall or whatever. Not everybody was like very serious about working. But the long and the short of it is you could have a, a study skills class. Like so many, Zoe's not the only one who would benefit from a study skills class. You're already paying a teacher to babysit these children. I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't cost anything, but so many students would benefit. So many students would be better prepared to go to college. You could teach them how to break a research paper down into individual parts. You could teach them how to benchmark their time. You could teach them the Pomodoro method. You could teach them calendaring, how to create a paper calendar, how to create an online calendar, how to create a Google calendar, which one works best for you, how to make an agenda, how to break down your, create your schedules. What if you don't do it that day? What about the next day? Kids with executive functions challenges, and this is a lot of kids. Not everybody has it as bad as Zoe, but I would say probably 20% of kids have some challenge with executive function.
Where are you getting that number?
Out of my head. I mean, I think I have some challenge with it, but I don't have a 504 plan. And I've talked to so many parents about it, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm totally ADD. And, they explain to me the ways in which, it's hard to keep a calendar. I think we all struggle to some degree with being organized. There are very few people who can say, I am organized.
Wow.
I never procrastinate. I've got it down to a science.
Charlotte, if I could interject, Sunil, this is something for you because this was a county policy change years ago when Montgomery County under Weiss, I believe, decided that study hall is not a valid placeholder for a period of the day.
Okay.
So it was removed. It is not officially a class. That is why it doesn't count toward anybody's GPA. It is literally like it doesn't exist in a student's schedule. When that gets reported on a transcript, it's like it was never there. And the county, it's like a hush-hush thing. The county does not talk about the fact that we provide study hall, although most high schools are providing it. So this is a policy.
I don't understand. I understand why it's not a class, but why is it hush-hush?
Resource is a class, by the way. They do get.
No, I understand that. So I understand this is a very good point you made, which is that the IEP gives you access to a resource class. Without an IEP, you cannot have access to it.
Right. No,
Is the study hall class happening outside of the student day?
No, it is inside. It's very complicated, but it really goes back to the concept that everyone in Montgomery County is going to four-year college. This is a holdover from Weiss, from way back. That is where we lost so many of our vocational programs was under him. This is why we're fighting to get those back. Our Edison type programs, which we don't have nearly enough of. I'm going to advocate for my kids that I teach. There's nothing. We have so few programs for them. There are a lot of things that have disappeared over time because Montgomery County has decided that all kids are going to college. Now, I will say Jack Smith has taken a slightly different tack. He is definitely much more of an advocate for vocational programs. He's more of an advocate for meeting students where they are, for trying to find other programs, alternative programs. And something like study hall, this is my understanding, is that it quietly disappeared because our students are supposed to be taking academic classes every period of the day. And study hall is a waste of time. Do that at home. This was the attitude. Do some investigating and figure out. I'm not sure exactly how or when this happened, but it is definitely something that could be addressed at the Board of Ed level because
that's right.
I think that speaks to a larger culture of like things that don't get grades are not worth our money in this county. And that's where one of the things we're failing at is our children's mental health.
Correct. Yep.
I should not be the only one here who has a social worker in my school. My students should not be the only ones that have access to social workers. My students, we need more counselors. We need more mental health professionals. I can't tell you how many trainings my program provided for K-2 teachers in general ed whose mainstream general education buildings need a me. They need a behavior support teacher, because we're asking our children to do, and this goes into a lot, we're asking our children to do things that are developmentally inappropriate at very young ages and regulate their bodies in ways that I wasn't asked to do when I was in kindergarten, and that was only 27 years ago or whatever it is, right? Like, so we need more mental health professionals. And we need them everywhere, and we need different types. We need more counselors, we need more social workers, we need more psychologists.
Well, and our school psychologists, some of our parents may not be aware of this, or maybe even Sunil, you are not aware of this. Our school psychologists, 100% of their time is involved with testing.
Yep, mine too. And mine is,
All they do.
and so we're lucky. Our school psychologist works with just our program, but she's at 4 schools. She's at 2 elementary schools who have higher caseloads than her 1 middle school and her 1 high school for the program, right? Like, she's for the program, which is great. She understands our kids. We do different types of testing, but it's 4 schools. It's still a large caseload. It's not as large as the mainstream general education school psychologist in any way, shape, or form, but it's still huge.
And this is some of the reason that your person who wrote in about groups, there are the clubs, but if they're talking about something that is adult supervised or sponsored, like a support group for
structured,
example, right, our growing population of students on the spectrum, for example, who really need those social skills,
problem solving. Yeah,
no, we don't have staff to provide anything like that. They are either testing, or counselors are dealing with emergencies and scheduling and the classes that the county tells them that they have to teach, because they do come into our rooms and they teach things. Our
counselors at an elementary school level go into the rooms and they teach as well. They don't have as much time for lunch bunches or for providing counseling services, right? Like,
yep.
and there's very few programs that have a dedicated social worker to provide those types of things. That's one of the things that, I mean, you were talking about your counselors and school psychologists are often on school crisis teams. And so if they're in a class and there's a crisis somewhere, they're leaving that class to go respond. One of the things that's working better for my students right now, because I'm, of course, also on my school crisis team, is that I can consistently show up every day at 2:30 and meet with one of my students one-on-one to talk about their day, or like check in and check out, where in the building, I love seeing them. It was great, but it was one of those things where you had to like kind of wander past the office. Is Miss Blaine in her office, or is she like down the hall helping so-and-so who's really struggling, right? So that's one of the things that's benefited my students in virtual learning, but there are a lot of students that need a me, that need a social worker, that need a counselor, that need more psychologists in their buildings more than one day or a half day a week.
Yes. And you need to be able to hire mental health professionals to be school counselors. School counselors are required to be credentialed by the Department of Education rather than credentialed as behavioral health providers. So they are first and foremost educators that have done a little bit of work in counseling versus counselors or therapists that are coming into the school setting.
Or so LCSWs, or yeah, exactly.
Right now, policy does not allow someone like me to be hired by MCPS.
As a school counselor.
As a school counselor.
You could be hired as a social worker.
If I were a social worker, yes, but I'm
okay. Sorry.
Therefore,
I wasn't sure what your letters were. I don't have your name up.
In very specific contexts where there is a social worker, which are very few.
It's very few. It's very few and far between. And then you have
you need those professionals in the school. You need more school psychologists. And then Lisa said something very important too when she was talking about it being very hush hush. We have people in this county who are making their living as independent special needs care navigators, right? Families are paying them to help them figure out the system. We need somebody within the system who's accessible to families from the minute that kids start getting any kind of conversation about accommodations. Somebody that can be that care navigator and walk them through, these are the programs countywide, and here's where you find them, and here are your options. And you really have to find just the right person to give you that information, and it shouldn't be hard to find. It should be
And
a phone
teachers
number.
aren't empowered to give that information. Teachers aren't empowered to give that information. I was in the classroom for 6 years, and then I was a paraeducator beforehand, right? Like, we're not empowered to talk to you openly. I think it's not the word I'm looking for, but like with candidly. It depends on your school.
That would be my experience as well.
It depends on your school. There are things that I am legally not allowed to say to you because then the county is required to pay for it, right? Like, I'm not legally allowed to tell you that like, there are certain things that I'm not legally allowed to say. I'm not legally allowed to say, like, your kid needs medication, right? I'm allowed to suggest that you go talk to your doctor, right? There's certain, like, special ed colloquialisms almost that you have to speak the language to know what your teacher is saying, because sometimes we're restricted from doing so because the county is a large structure that protects itself.
It protects its budget too.
Right.
All these services cost money, and it always invariably comes down to money.
And so, like, when you're talking about mental health services and having more social workers, behavior support teachers at the elementary school level, or counselors or psychologists, you have to, like, you can't talk about special ed. You got to talk about the benefits to gen ed, or they don't listen. Because why are we going to spend this money to serve this amount of students when I have this many students outside of special ed?
So this conversation is actually just breaking my heart.
Really?
Yes. So because it just, so I don't know if you know, but I was the health and safety chair for MCCPTA for, starting 2017. I started the Mental Health and Wellness Forum. And when I decided to run for the board in December of last year, one of the things that really bugged me and let me do that is this constant talk about Be Well 365, which I wish had 365 positions. Right?
It's a lovely poster, though. It really does.
But now, of course, we are in this crisis, and we don't have the money to do that, and sort of, it's just this entire thing of we need somebody to walk parents through the system. There's this whole thing about jargon and not understand, and then the fact that a teacher cannot talk candidly to a parent, that to me is just unacceptable in some sort of absolute way. That is the reason I started doing the parent teacher happy hours, maybe what was it, over a year and a half ago now, and then these chats. I'm just appalled that we have let things come to this pass. Look, it's obviously I personally cannot fix all of this, but I'm heartbroken at this conversation. And as I heard everybody here, right, I want to say to you that I'm going to try my damnedest, right, to see that we try to get study hall back, right, that we get some kind of support for parents, navigating the special ed system, 504 and IEP system. Now I know that those are different avenues, right? And we're going to try to do that. And of course, we have to look at more at social emotional learning. I want to couple of things that actually that I've been thinking about that I want to talk to you about is that, there has been a special, I've heard this, and I want to check this out with you. There's supposed to be a shortage of special ed teachers, right? There's a shortage of teachers overall, but there's a particular shortage of special ed teachers. And I want to talk a little bit, right, about, and to my mind, right, some of these problems with services have to do with the number of staff that is actually available, right? It's not as if we want to hire a lot. Even if we could hire a lot of staff, we couldn't just uptake a lot of special ed teachers from, they're not available, right? Is that correct? And so can you sort of think or sort of try to tease out why it is that we have a particular special ed teacher shortage? And, you know, all of you have some experience in this. And then what, I mean, maybe think about what we can do about it.
So it's interesting you bring that up. I'm a graduate of University of Maryland for my master's degree. I did their 2-year intensive thing after I graduated from college, a couple years after I graduated from college after being a para. And they recently shut down their 5-year BA MA program.
Yeah, I think there's one special education program, one special ed master's track at Maryland left.
Yep.
Of the many different ones they had, because they had such under enrollment.
They did. They had significant under enrollment. And I don't think my program even exists anymore. My program was specifically designed for people who wanted to go into, and I had to choose a track. Like I had to, when I applied early ed and severe disabilities, right? Like that was my program. That's the cohort that I was in. That cohort doesn't exist anymore. And the 5-year track is completely gone. And so you have, I mean, it's expensive. I went to a state school. I'm a product of Maryland schools. I grew up in Howard County. I have significant debt from my master's program, and I don't make enough money by myself to pay it off, right? Like, and that's just teachers in general. But when you think about what special educators do and the language that has come out around special educators and how our job has become a lot more, the paperwork demands are significant.
Ridiculous, yeah.
The paper, I spend hours and hours and hours supporting my case managers and taking things off of their plate so that they can teach and serve our students. And I am in a space and in a program where I'm able to support in that way. But there are a lot of special educators and a lot of programs that don't have a program head in their building or near them. Or, I mean, when I started in the county, I was in a discrete program I was in the SCB program. There were 2 of us in the building. We were both first-year educators, and there was no program head. There was nobody I could call.
And no program.
And no program. There was no cohort.
Curriculum.
Like it was right at the switch from functional life skills to the really ridiculous curriculum they bought. But and so we had a bunch of trainings that I was required to go to learn how to implement curriculum 2.0 for my SCB kindergarten students. But if I had entered the county at a different point, I would have never met those other teachers who were who served the same students in the same type of way, right? And so there's no cohorting. There's been a decrease, I think, also in access for student teachers. I've seen less of those across the county as well. Less schools are willing to do it. Less teachers are willing to do it because they're overloaded. And so if you don't have a good mentor teacher, you're not going to be a good teacher, right? Like if you don't have that opportunity in your program, when you're learning to become a teacher, how do you learn that this is what you want to do and these are the kids you want to work with?
Boy, not having just one special ed master's program in all of Maryland.
I don't know that it's in all of Maryland, just at UMD. They decreased significantly. And that's our closest, right? Like that's our, right. Isn't it? That's our closest.
University of Maryland. There are programs at all the other schools.
Yeah, Towson still has, you know, a lot of our teachers come out of Towson now, I think.
And Hopkins actually has been the leader in special education. They created the system that we use in Maryland, MOIEP, which is now the online system that we use. That was Hopkins' created system.
Yeah, Hopkins has been increasing their programming for special ed. They have an ABA program now too.
I think, honestly, the solutions to the problems in special education are a moot point at this point because of the economy. Because the solutions in special education cost a lot of money and we don't have it. So I think we're aware in special ed that we're going to have to keep doing more with less. And there's been an erosion of support for special education over years. There have been small changes. They seemed small at the time, and each thing was added, each, let's say, support
Like
for.
all those instructional specialist positions that got cut.
Yeah, but going even further back, I mean,
Yeah.
there used to be, the caseloads used to be smaller because the numbers of staff were larger. Depending on the program, there were more release periods. So in high school, special educators used to have an additional planning period to really handle case management and caseload paperwork. We don't have that anymore.
One of my school changes, one of the reasons I've been in 4 programs in 7 years and in 4 different schools is because of budget cuts. I got, my position was eliminated. I worked in early childhood in the PEP program, and I worked in PEP Inc. And PEP Inc. used to have a morning teacher and an afternoon teacher. And when you weren't with students in the classroom, so I was an afternoon teacher. So my morning job was doing case management and home visits and instituting behavioral programs at home and supporting parents where they were and doing community outings, because I had parents who couldn't take their 3-year-old to the grocery store. And so we would practice that. And that program got cut. They decided that they could not afford to have a teacher outside of the classroom doing nothing. And so I had to find a new job. I loved that job. It was the best of both worlds. It was fantastic.
So this would imply that the overall special ed budget is down. It's not. The overall budget is, the aggregate special ed budget is not down.
So I'm not a budget expert, but I can tell you that the numbers of students that we serve at Blair has increased every single year.
And the money doesn't go up.
That's right. So yes, maybe the budget is up,
Okay.
but I don't know what the per pupil spending ratio is. That's what you would want to look at. I don't know what the cost is per student. Total number, it might be up because the numbers in special education have gone up.
Actually, County Council did this thing. The OLO, which is the Office of Legislative Oversight, did an analysis of this, and they found that, in fact, the cuts in compensatory. So this is a band called compensatory education. So special ed and English language learners, some of this are compensated by the state. And so I think they found that special ed had gotten more or had continued to get more, but and actually English language English language education, they got cut at the per pupil level. I will go back and look at this. This is very fascinating to me.
The other thing you have to think about is, like, depending on your program, your per pupil spending is more for special education, right? Like if
of course, that's of course true. That is of course
higher need. But the other thing, I think this is a county-wide situation. The numbers of students in the county has increased. It just continues to increase. And I understand the value of infill in planning and building lots of apartment buildings near metros, etc. But in this part of the county, as a family of 4, let's say, if you are a working class family, you do not own a single family home. You can't afford it. So you are living in an apartment that was designed for a young single or couple who maybe don't have a car and use Metro. Now I've got 2 additional kids in my classroom who weren't supposed to be there because they're living in an apartment that was designated in planning, where everybody thought that it was just going to be some young couple. I think there's just been a tremendous increase in the numbers of students in our buildings. Blair,
I grant you the increase in number of students, but I've seen that data. The new students are not coming from apartments. They're coming from a turnover of old housing. So the bulk of the students are coming from a turnover of old housing. So this is obviously takes it far away from special ed. But I agree with the larger
those are my kids.
Well, there's that.
Those are. All my students live in the apartments.
Sunil, at the beginning you asked me if enrollment was down or up. For me, it stayed the same. Our program fluctuates depending on how people move and things like that. But last year in January, I got 4 students in 3 weeks. Last year, I accepted 4 new kindergartners into my program in the second semester, right? So we're getting more and more students identified with special education needs, whose needs would be met outside of special education if we could meet their emotional and behavioral needs earlier. If we could meet the needs of these learners with their executive functioning, with their emotional regulation, with their social skills, and support those in different programs in different ways before they get to high school, before they get to middle school,
Mm-hmm.
the per pupil spending would go further, right? Like we don't have enough intervention in this area, right? And so I'm getting a lot of kids, a lot more kids, I think, in our elementary school programs, not just mine, but in Learning Center. When I worked at Carl Sandburg, we got 16 students in like 2 months in K and 1. In kindergarten and first grade. That's a self-contained special education school,
yeah,
right? Like that's a lot. And they didn't give us new teachers, and they didn't give us additional paras, and right, like we absorbed it. Yay, good us. But like more and more students are being identified with really intensive emotional, social, and executive functioning and anxiety and impulse controlled needs that impact our special education budget spending on a larger level, because it's a ripple effect.
Correct. I accept that, and I think that's a call to action, right? That's absolutely a call to action. But and I was just sort of trying to match all the data that I have in my head with what you're saying, and I was like, okay, let me just clarify. So
I don't know where the money went.
An hour and 15 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know where the money went, but
yeah,
we don't see it. Me and Lisa.
We could spend an hour more, and
I know exactly where the money went.
But I want to come back. Pardon me?
Do you have any idea how much MCPS spends on lawyers, outside lawyers, to find parents just like me? Last time I looked at it, $500,000 to start for just high-level legal claims. Fighting parents is something that MCPS spends way too much money on. And if they could just get a little more cooperative, a little more forthcoming, and strike a different type of relationship, we could use that money to put back into special ed. And parents like me would fight alongside the teachers for those services. We are put in opposition to each other when we should be fighting side by side.
Yeah, that's one sort of problem I see, sort of structural problem I see in the way that special ed is set up. It's adversarial. And I don't know if that is necessary. I don't know. But so it's 9:30. We can stay on for very much longer, but I'm going to let you go and with a request that you come back and we continue this conversation, because I think having this conversation in like this, I think takes things forward. I think we have much better understanding of where things are. And today I've learned a great deal. Right. Before we go, I want to answer Lavanya, who asked on Facebook about whether MCPS has decided or about a date to go back. And Lavanya, you're right. A lot of our learners, especially our special ed learners, are not getting the education that they are due. And I think everybody here on this panel agrees with that. We do not have a date of return. But what I am really concerned about right now is that whether we have a date of return or not, are we planning for that eventuality? Or are we, my big concern is that we will go into a decision to return without having planned and answered the questions about, is there a protocol, right? Is there space? Who is going to go first? Are there teachers? Are we honoring their individual choices, right? there are so many questions to answer, and I do not see any serious planning around those questions. So that's my really big concern. Well, thank you to all of you. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you'll come back. So with that, I'm going to say good night. Good night to everybody who watched. We're going to put this up on YouTube, and it'll be there forever. So you can watch it. Thank you, and thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Sunil. Good night, everybody.
Bye,
Great
all.
talk.
Good luck. Yeah.